I'm here with Ann Nelson, a dear friend and a beautiful human that I got to interact with and learn about. And she's a change agent in the area of relationships. She's a positive psychology practitioner and a neurofeedback trainer. Can you just describe that in more detail? I didn't know what neurofeedback was. Can you just give us and the all of us a good picture of what you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a
Welcome.
pleasure. Well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm excited for this conversation. So yes, I am a positive psychology practitioner, neurofeedback trainer, and coach. And I primarily help people in the areas of relationships and resilience. I help them to be able to pop up and really walk into the best version of themselves and walk it out in real time in their life. And so that's what I'm really passionate about. However, the neurofeedback piece is a catalyst for that as well. And it's a little bit of a different modality, so to speak. I use a software and we actually use sensors on the scalp that read the brain waves and give the brain feedback in the form of visual and auditory responses. And what it does is it gives you an alert when you are operating outside of optimal range and gives the brain a chance to go, wait a minute, do I want to make this change? Do I want to continue this old pattern? And obviously the brain, because of the neuroplasticity, really deeply desires to be at its best. And so the brain will tend to lend itself towards healing and wholeness. And as a result, people see great benefits in areas like PTSD, ADD, anxiety, and just overall performance. Some people use it for performance to really be at their best, whether they're an athlete or a speaker or whatever the case may be.
So how do you engage that technology? What would that look like if you were working with me? I'm just so curious about, and then I want
Yeah.
people to understand it because it's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's super simple. So you would just come into my office and it's an in-person practice. And so what you would have these sensors, much like an EEG sensor, but for the scalp, right? There's some paste and we have certain places we put it on the scalp. And as you sit on a comfy couch and you view a screen, you'll see images and hear music. And what happens is when you're outside that ideal range, you get a break in the visual and the auditory that alerts you to something. But the catch is these breaks happen at 265 times a second. So most of them you will not even notice on a conscious level. Most of them will be very subconscious. Every now and then you might hear a static or see a jerk on the screen. And what that means is that you've got a cluster of feedback, which means it's really important, right, to hear that feedback. And then you'll be more cognizant of that. But often people notice slight changes over time. Some people notice big changes over a period of 1 or 2 sessions. So it really varies per person, right?
So,
Because everybody's unique and individual.
so are you, you're looking for some major shifts within the brain pattern, and then how does the person who's there with you understand what it's connected to?
What the
Yeah, what it
shift is going to,
means. Yeah,
yeah. So it doesn't really. The person
yeah,
doesn't really have a conscious awareness unless that's through the dialogue, right? As we're talking and we're uncovering
yeah.
family of origin issues, subconscious patterns in your life, that will come through more the dialogue that we have. And that's the beautiful thing, though, is the brain understands what, the neuroplastic behavior, right? That when we make new choices, we have new patterns of behavior, that new neural pathway gets built up. And so when we continue to make positive changes, whether it's consciously or whether it's subconsciously, we make these positive changes, the old ways, the old neural pathways, neural connections actually atrophy a bit so that the other ones can get strong. I jokingly say it's a little bit like taking your brain to the gym, right? It's
Yeah.
getting, the healthy pathways are getting strengthened.
Yeah, I love to talk about exercising our muscle for whatever it is that we're wanting in our lives.
Mhm.
So if it's good decision making or good habits, every time you do it,
Yeah,
you're creating a momentum by exercising that muscle. So it's similar
yeah.
to that. So this program is called Extraordinary Results, and how to shift, breakthrough, and be your best. And you're helping people shift. You're in
Mhm.
the area of healthy relationships. And why are you so passionate about healthy relationships?
Well, because we are created to be in relationship, right? So we have known for a long time that the whole idea of social connection correlates with healthy emotional states, right? And achievement. So we innately desire connection. As a matter of fact, when we don't have that social connection, we tend to get anxious. And especially when it's in that primary relationship that you might have, there is a anxiety, a hypervigilance that can come out of that, right? And when we act, everybody's heard the statement, hurt people, right? And so if we don't learn how to connect with other people in a positive, healthy manner, we perpetuate this kind of dysfunction that maybe we took from our home, that we've seen in our community, whatever the case may be. And we perpetuate that and sometimes magnify that because we don't know better. We're all doing the best we can with the information we have at the time. And events like yours are one of the reasons why we get new information. So now we get to have a shift. We get, with that information, the brain makes choices, right? And everybody who's listening to our voices today are able to say, yes, I want to do that differently, or no, I like this old pattern that's creating problems for me. And so with that ability to choose, most people want to choose what's good. Most people want to choose connection. Most people recognize the need for social connection. Even those people that are the most introverted, that get most annoyed by people, recognize their need for relationship. And so it's so important to have a healthy relationship, because that's also going to bless not only yourself and your partner, but anybody in your sphere of influence, whether it's children, extended family, community, and in this case, your event and your community that you're creating here around this idea of being extraordinary. Right?
Now, you mentioned something that's curious to me. Why do people, I'm sure they don't come out and say, I'd like to stay in this behavior, this pattern that's been hurting me, but why is it that people do that? Why is it that there is a pattern and they see the pattern and they're so frustrated with it, but they don't or won't change? Could you talk about the characteristics that surround that sort of action and behavior?
Sure. So we don't change, obviously when there's enough pain from the negative behavior, that's motivating to want to change. And at the same time, we have all these subconscious beliefs, right? So we grew up in a family, we took on a way of surviving in that family. So our family is what could have been Leave It to Beaver better than Leave It to Beaver. Although if we watch Leave It to Beaver close enough, we see that it wasn't necessarily the most healthy family, right? And then the other end of the spectrum where, things are blatantly a wreck. Either way, and when we're developing in childhood, we are learning to adapt to our environment. And if that environment is nurturing and supportive and allows you to develop your own sense of identity, that's beautiful and helpful. And if it's there to support you emotionally, so that when you've had that, bully on the playground, you have somebody who's willing to sit and really listen to how that affect you and to reassure you, that will show you a certain way of interacting with the world. And it becomes subconscious because we do it over and over and over. And it's been reinforced because it's what we've learned from our family of origin. It gets reinforced. So flash forward and you're 30 years old and you can't figure out why your relationship isn't working, and you have destructive patterns, but you're not really clear how destructive and what's destructive, because all you're seeing it through is your own lens. You're not seeing it through the lens of other personalities and other people.
All feels completely normal to us because we're so close to it.
Exactly. And then as a result, even when we see something that's hurting us, it takes a lot of mental energy to actually make that shift. So maybe you developed a coping mechanism, and your coping mechanism may be drinking too much, right? Well, it's harder to change that, not only because of the addictive patterns, but because the brain is naturally lazy. The brain wants to conserve energy. It doesn't want to waste energy, because the brain is all about your survival, your functioning. And so it's going to feel difficult to embrace a new way of thinking, embrace a new pattern. If it's not difficult, it's not new. And we want to be able to step into that with some
that is interesting, the contrast between hearing what people say about things should be easy if they're right. And some things are difficult because we're shifting a pattern. That's an embedded pattern. So it's not going to be comfortable. You're trying something kind of for the first time. So what are some of the main things that keep us from keep people from a really healthy relationship. And we're really predominantly, I've asked you to predominantly talk about the partner relationship.
Yes. Yes. So number one is kind of leads off of our last question is
Yeah.
self-awareness, right? So there's so much that we do almost in a visceral response in our life, right? It's the subconscious just walking out and perceiving things a certain way. And all we know, our framework is what we've experienced. And so really being able to step into, okay, maybe I don't know something, right? Maybe I need to take a personality assessment. Maybe I need to get some honest feedback from people who will really be honest with me, setting people up for success and saying, we all have areas to grow on. Would you just give me some feedback on where you think I could be growing? Because they're going to give you a perspective that's not your own. And so to really cultivate this idea of self-awareness is step number one, because if you don't know yourself, you're not going to be able to make that growth and that change. And if you don't know yourself, you don't know how you're coming across to your partner.
Yeah. If I could interject on that, after my second divorce, I thought, I'm a really good person. Why am I not attracting a great relationship? I'm kind, I'm thoughtful, I'm intelligent. And it caused me to start thinking, maybe I believe something that's not working for me. So I hit self-awareness after a second divorce. It took that long.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not alone. You're not alone in that at all.
You think it's something on the outside. You don't think until you're repeating.
Yeah.
You don't think it's something on the inside.
Something.
So I just wanted to,
yeah. No, that's true. And something that I remind my clients of all the time is everybody is doing the best they can with the information they have at the time. Whether we're talking about your parents, whether we're talking about your spouse, whether you're talking about your boss, they're doing the best they have with the information that they have at the time. And so with that in place, that applies to what you just described. You were doing the best you could. Yeah. And that self-awareness piece is so important because when we start to notice that things aren't working, we can look a little bit deeper into the issue. And one of the things that can be a real component in marital or intimate relationships is the attachment style. So I'm a firm believer that marriage can be a beautiful place for healing for the attachment style wounds that we gained growing up, but it also comes about because it usually pokes on something from childhood, right? So are you familiar with attachment style theory in general?
In general.
Yeah.
But could you go into it a little bit for us?
Sure, absolutely. I'll just go into some basics. We'll be really super basic here. But so when we grow up, depending on our environment, we learn how to gain security in our home. Sometimes the attachment style would be like an anxious attachment style, right? Let me back up for a second. First, say what the goal is a secure attachment style. We kind of touched on that earlier in our conversation. This idea of I'm free to be me, you're free to be you. I can share my heart with you, you can share your heart with me. I can do things that maybe are a little bit different than the rest of my family. I'm still loved and embraced and nurtured. That when I skin my knee, you want to give me the Band-Aid. When my heart is broken, you want to listen to my concerns.
So sweet.
And and when I decide I want to go off on a venture that you maybe don't even think is a great venture, you're willing to let me try, fail, and be there for me when I fail, right? So all these dynamics, that's just your secure attachment where you know that you're confident about that and you can move forward. About 50% or so don't have that growing up. So if you don't have a secure attachment growing up, you might have two major ones are the anxious attachment and the avoidant attachment. And there's some other, we can break it down to more of that, but the main buckets fall there. And anxious attachment is this almost yearning for love. There's this inner thirst or hunger of, I don't feel loved enough. I don't feel connected enough. I don't feel like I matter enough to these people. And no matter what's going on, there's this sense of I need from the people in their life. And this is the person who, say you and your partner get into a conflict and you're the one that won't let it drop. You won't let them have their space to process what they're thinking. When they say, can we talk about this tomorrow? You are about to lose it because you're afraid you're going to lose the relationship. Yes. Yes, exactly. And it's all, again, doing the best you can with the information you have at the time. What you feel on the inside is we've got to be connected or I might lose this relationship, right? And sometimes people that are raised in an alcoholic home, this can be a dynamic that occurs there. There's a lot of caretaking involved in that scenario. And then we have the avoidant personality. And the avoidant personality is the person that usually was trying to avoid backlash, avoid conflict, avoid strife in the home. And so what that looks like is they learn to shut down emotionally. So they become very independent. They fear that they'll become codependent if they allow somebody themselves to need somebody. Like, if I really want to be in relationship with you, if I want to be present, if your opinion matters in my life, oh no, am I codependent? But you're not. You're just so afraid of that connection going south that you kind of shut down. And when emotions come up, I've actually had clients that get so shut down that in the midst of a conflict with their spouse, they will start to fall asleep.
Wow.
So that's kind of the avoidant. Now, most people don't fall asleep. They're more likely to say, well, I'm not going to have this conversation right now, and they'll leave and then not come back to the conversation at all. Or busy themselves with work and other activities intentionally, or just go deer caught in headlights and just stare at you until you're done, with your conversation and say, okay, fine, and then walk away. So that's kind of the more avoidant personality. And what can happen here when you get these two personalities together is a lot of tension, as you might imagine. And this threatens this security that we have, the social communal connection that we all need. When we don't have it, it can create more of that hypervigilance. And then one of the other personalities that's smaller in percentages would be the fearful, which is in essence a combination of the both. It's the person that says, I love you, I love you, I love you, go away. You're too much. I'm overwhelmed. I love you. I need you. I need you. I need you. No, too much, right? They're real back and forth, right?
Polarity shifting.
Yeah. But when you know what your attachment style is, and you feel, for instance, that yearning, that hunger, like, I just need to finish this conversation, but you say to yourself, but I recognize that I tend towards anxious attachment, and they said they'll talk to me tomorrow. So no matter what feelings I have here, I can tell myself tomorrow's the conversation, and I can be okay with that. And the reverse is true. When the partner's saying, hey, can we just finish this conversation? I really need you to hear me. Oh, that can be alert. I've been avoidant. They need my attention. This is a safe place, right? And we can create healing by consciously being aware of our attachment style and leaning into the opposite.
That's interesting. So often we're afraid to identify what we are and how we operate, like our operating system, where some of us are afraid to find out what it is. But once you know it, that's your toolbox.
Yes.
And then you know what you gravitate towards, and you can be more forgiving with yourself when you're gravitating in that direction, and understand that you have the power to shift and try other things. So it really gives you, it empowers you when you figure out, sometimes you think it's fate, sometimes you think it's you were born that way. But if you just discover how it is, then you don't have to have the excuse outside of yourself. You can own it.
And a lot of people live in, that's a really good point, because a lot of people live in shame. So they're afraid to admit these things as if something's wrong with them. And what I want to say is that our brains were designed to protect ourselves. And so if you developed a anxious or avoidant or any other attachment style other than secure, your brain was protecting yourself. It was doing what it needed to do at the time to support you and help you.
Yeah, so you can say thank you.
Yes, you can
basically
say thank you.
These incredible defense mechanisms that we created. What I found is that if I can recognize them and where they came from, then I can say thank you, self, or thank you, spiritual connection, for protecting me. And now I don't need that anymore, but thank you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because sometimes I have found that it's hard to let go of that security blanket you created, because you've bonded with it. It's become a friend on one level, and it's keeping you from a bigger life on another level. So it's like, to say thank you for it and leave it. It had its purpose. It has helped me over time to make shifts.
Yeah.
So I don't have to be wrong and then right. I don't have to leave a part of myself behind. I can say, that was really intelligent what you came up with.
Mm-hmm.
And now we
Right.
don't need it because of that, because it worked
Right.
for that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so in that too, we have the idea when we're looking at our self-awareness and our attachment style, the reality is we can also create what they call an earned secure attachment. So when you say thank you for what what you adapted to early on and choose to lean in to growth and healing, you can actually within your intimate relationships create an earned secure attachment that now you begin to experience what we talked about in the beginning, where it's safe to be you. Yeah, it is beautiful. It's a beautiful healing process. And it takes the ability to choose to be responsible, right? We often talk about, I need to take responsibility for that, or you need to take responsibility for that. And when we remove need to take and say be responsible for that, what does that take from you? What do I need to do to be responsible for me?
Yeah.
And so we can look through this lens of self-awareness at the personality style, at the attachment style, all the different factors, and be responsible for what we're taking into.
Yeah, the difference between saying, just if for those of us who are participating, say to yourself at this moment, I take responsibility for that, or I'm responsible. There's quite a difference in the feeling that it gives you within yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. When we are responsible, we feel capable. When I take responsibility, it's outside of me.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm capable. I can do that.
And when you have done something that you're not proud of, but you say, I'm responsible for that, you're still holding on to the power that is you. It's less embarrassing than if you avoid that. When someone steps into the room and they say, I'm responsible for what just happened, it calms everything.
Yeah.
And you respect that person for doing that. So it's a point of power, and I feel like people respect you for it. Yeah. You get received in a favorable way, I think, for taking the risk.
Yes, absolutely. And there'll always be people who may not receive you well. Yeah. And then the question is that the dynamic that you want in your life, right? Because as you want to be responsible, you want the people around you to be responsible for themselves. And in that, on a side note, it's an amazing blessing for our kids to see their parents be responsible, to come in and say, I did that. I'm sorry. How did that feel to you? And allow them to talk about whatever it was. Right?
Yeah, that's a great in all arenas. Parenting, if you're a teacher, and we're all teachers, on your work team, whatever it is, it shows a humanity, and it stops the chaos.
It does, yeah.
So we've talked about self-awareness, personality style, and now we're talking about personal responsibility. What else? What else is leading to a healthy relationship?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, and it all kind of ties into each other, right? So our attachment style we develop, we also have different personalities out there, right? Everybody has their own way of showing up in the world, whether you're looking at the Myers-Briggs or you're looking at the Enneagram or we're looking at the DISC, right? But when we look at these different personalities, there's like a strong, they're so different. We have a different lens that we see the world, right? Yeah. So for instance, you might have a really strong controlling personality that just jumps in and does things. And they may, by the nurturing, caring, helper personality, might be viewed as harsh, but their intention is good. But because of your own personality, you see it as harsh. Or this person that's very strong and can be controlling, but gets things done, their motivation is often because for the good of other people. They want to see good for people. And they see this person that seems wishy-washy and always helping everybody out as, well, you're not helping anybody because you're just, right? And so it's the lens.
They drive each other crazy.
They do. And I took two polar opposites, but there's, depending on which personality test you're using, there's anywhere from 4 to 16 different ways of showing up. And if we're aware of our personality style and aware of what other styles are out there. It allows for a sense of humility, right? It's good to be grounded in, I bring a unique, beautiful gift to the world, but so do you and you and you and you and you, and it presents differently. And we want to embrace that. So that personality style becomes really important to kind of expound on. Personality styles can be all very healthy and they all have their strengths and their weaknesses, and to recognize those things and to be able to flex with that within your relationships. And when you and your partner both know kind of your personality style, for instance, we talked about that strong personality style, like on the Enneagram, it would be an 8 and a 2. You know, when we talk about those two different personality styles, if you can talk about the differences, you can meet in the middle. You can say, okay, I know it's really important to you that I get succinct and to the point. So let me just say it here. This is what I mean, but now I need you to listen to my heart about it, blah, 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 right?
That's really interesting, because my partner, who I have the most fabulous relationship I've ever had with, he has a different operating system than I do. And sometimes it actually could heighten the differences between us, because as he becomes more in his quadrant, I want to become more in mine, and we become more polarized.
Right.
And us understanding it and talking about it now, I really look at what he brings to the table that I don't.
Right.
And so more often, that's where I've shifted. I've shifted more often to the stability or the peacefulness or the analyzer that he brings to the table. And I could be more flippant in coming to a fast decision. So oftentimes we've attracted this characteristic we really admire, but it's not as strong within us. And then we kick it when we get it in our relationship. But really, if we can see the beauty of it, then you become a more powerful one in a way.
Yes, absolutely. And if we're not conscious of this, if we're not responsible for our personality, if we're not responsible for our relationship, if we're not choosing that, we will react instead of act, right? And when we react to one another, we push one another away.
Yeah.
But when we act, we create unity and we create a bond, and we become a better version of ourselves because we see things more clearly, not just through our own lens.
It's really magical if you get the balance right.
Right.
Because we often attract, we're drawn to often characteristics that we don't seem to really be able to embody, and we're admiring those and we're working on those, and then we often attract that person. And so when you acknowledge that you've brilliantly attracted it and then work with that, you've added that characteristic into your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things in the process of being responsible for yourself, for the relationship, all of these things that can sometimes create a bump in the road is unresolved trauma. Okay, so whether it's big T or little t, most people have experienced something. Whenever I've hosted an event on trauma, I've got 99.9% of the audience, yes, I've experienced trauma. And it's just the reality of things, right? And that's okay, because again, your body was responding to the trauma to protect you at the time. And you get to say thank you and move forward. If the trauma, when you have trauma in your childhood or earlier life that you haven't resolved, and then you get into a relationship, what that can do is create more opportunity for things like PTSD within the relationship. Broken trust, broken promises, different things, you can become more reactive. So if you find yourself in a relationship where you're feeling like you're reactive, maybe you're not certain why you are, maybe you're prone to blaming your partner, get some feedback, first of all, from people outside of you that say, okay, is my reaction proportionate to the offense, right? And if it's not, looking at, okay, did I have trauma that I didn't resolve? Because that very trauma that you didn't resolve at 2, 5, 12, 15, 18, 30 in your relationship today can be creating this underlying hypervigilance that is ready to be on guard for any little thing to go wrong. And as long as you're hypervigilant in your relationship is going to be bumpy and reactive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it makes me think of how early on, when I was really young, if I would get hurt, I would think, what do I need to learn here? I'm never going to have that happen again. But each person you meet is a brand new person.
Mhm.
So you can't bring necessarily the rules and experiences to that new relationship.
Mhm.
So if you're guarded because something happened from another relationship, you might be guarded and needlessly guarded with the
Mhm.
wrong person, and you're messing up the balance. So
Right.
it's interesting. I mean, we talk about big traumas, but also just being kind of heartbroken can be really traumatic for somebody. So
Right.
then you walk around with this, I'm not going to get hurt this way again, and you attract the very things that you don't want.
Yes.
Can you talk at all a little bit about your experience with that? How we can actually be drawing towards us the very thing that we actually are wanting not to have? How does that happen?
Yes. Yeah. Well, because the brain cannot not think of anything. So what I mean by that is if I tell you there is not a pink elephant with a white tutu dancing behind you, guess what you're picturing? Exactly. So when we say, I don't want this, like a lot of times when people are praying, like, God, just don't let me have this, well, what your brain is thinking about is having this. So why not give it something that you want?
Yeah.
Lord, I want a healthy, productive marriage. I want to be able to flourish personally and relationally. I want my career to grow and be strong and create a vessel of healing for the community around me. Why not focus on those things? Because the
Yeah.
brain understands that. But if you put a not in front of it, it doesn't make it go away.
Right, because your mind is still fixed. So if you really don't want something or you're scared of something and it's you're obsessed with it, that is what your brain is thinking about. All it's kind of like the idea that you can't solve a problem while you're in the problem, that
Mm-hmm.
you can't be in a solution when you're still thinking about the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sure.
it's that same principle, isn't it?
It really is, and it's working with what we have. The organ that we've been given, that really being able to seek what you want. Because when we grow up and we say, "I don't want a marriage like my parents," we find ourselves in a marriage like our parents. I don't want to get in another emotionally destructive relationship. Guess what happens, right? But when we start to define what we want and seeking that, and then that leads into attention bias, right? So if you are praying for, if you are seeking, if you are just speaking mantras about, I want, this is my life, this is my future, you're envisioning the positive that you want, now you're going to notice it. You're going to actually notice when it comes up because of attention bias. It's been on your mind. It's kind of the same thing as when you go to the car lot, you buy a car and you think you're being really original. You got this unique car, and then you get on the road and everybody else has your car.
Because you
What in the
notice.
world?
It's
Yeah.
like when you're pregnant, you notice pregnant women everywhere. And before that, you didn't notice. It's because it's on your mind. You
Yeah.
actually, you're looking through that lens.
Yeah. And one other factor with that is that negative emotions narrow in focus and positive emotions broaden and build.
Wow.
So when
Yeah.
we focus on the negative, all we see is that negative that we're focusing in on. But when we focus on what's positive, what's good, all of a sudden our view is expanded and we can see more. If you even just for a moment take the thought like, oh, I hate it when I bump my knee. You're thinking about your knee
Yeah.
versus I love it on a beautiful day. All of a sudden I have all these beautiful things in my mind, right?
Mhm.
So
Another thing I wonder if you could speak to is then if you know what you want, how could you think about you as the one who's going to draw that very thing? I talked to my dad years ago, and he was talking about when he was, what he was looking for in a woman, in a partner. And what he said to me was, I was looking to attract. Instead of say I was looking for, he was telling me who he felt like he needed to be if he wanted to have a woman like that in his life. And I've never heard, I had thought, wow, that's really incredibly advanced for my 90-something-year-old father. That's how
yeah,
advanced his thinking was as an attractor.
yeah,
Can you talk
absolutely.
about that? Who often we look on the outside of ourselves, who do we get to be? And how do we consider that to attract the very partner that we're thinking we want?
Yes, yes. Well, I love that. I love that that was your statement of your father. That's just beautiful. And I think a lot of that we undervalue the idea of visualization. We undervalue the idea of prayer and the role it can play in our lives. So when we take the time to seek what we want for ourselves, when you're thinking about attracting the partner, right? Well, then you want to say, well, if this kind of partner that I want, what kind of person are they going to want? Right?
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
that the person I am? And is that the person I want to be? Maybe the person you think you want isn't going to really be attracted to somebody that you want to be. And that's okay. Because then it helps you to clarify, what is my vision? What is my goal? What am I wanting? And I often say that when you kind of flesh out what you want to say it aloud, because the brain likes to obey us.
Hmm.
Okay. So when we speak it aloud, we are speaking into our brain and our thinking to be able to find and see and be. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. I mean, you are studying the brain, and so I was just thinking, as you said it, it's beautiful to hear you talk about what the brain wants. The brain is part of us, but it's also like another aspect. So it could be like another person. So we're trying to please the brain, and this is what the brain wants. We want to understand the brain and how it works.
Well,
And
we're using the tools that we've been given,
yeah,
right?
right.
So we all have different tools for different activities that we use, and our brain is a pretty crucial tool to function in life and relationships.
And I like the way you talked about having the conversation with yourself about the partner you're interested in and what kind of a person you think that person would be attracted to. And do you like that?
Yeah.
Often we just, I don't know, people just look around and they don't really put that kind of deep thinking in. And it's not that much more effort to think
Right.
in that way. But if you think, I want an athletic partner who loves to do things, well, what if you're someone who's not that interesting? You don't really do much. Are you
Mhm.
willing to be someone who is expanding yourself?
Right. Right. Well, exactly. Because again, we can kind of get stuck in the subconscious thinking, right? So we have developed certain patterns, and we can do a lot of personal work and still start to notice old thinking patterns or old subconscious thoughts that we're not setting out to do, right? So you would think in your mind, I want this really successful person that looks like this, because maybe subconsciously that's what you grew up valuing. But then when you ask yourself the question, do I want to be the person they'd be attracted to? And you say, that's not the person I want to be. So maybe that's
Mhm.
not really who I want, because that's just going to
Yeah,
create strife in our dynamic if
yeah,
we're not having the same vision. And
that's
you say,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, that's just it's a different level of thinking about attracting a relationship that I think most people don't think about. So that's a real gift. Thank you for that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love what you're doing here.
Yeah, thank you. And then you have, so we've talked about attachment style, self-awareness, personality, trauma.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that affects a really beautiful, healthy relationship that you work with?
Yes, yes. Well, on the flip side, we've talked about kind of pros and cons in certain areas, and one that's always a pro is appreciation and gratitude. So we've talked about briefly that positive emotions broaden and build, right? And negative emotions narrow and focus. When we take the time to articulate what we appreciate about our partner, what we appreciate about their character, and be specific. If there's specific praise and then there's this general praise, right? So if I say, oh, you're great, Anne,
Yeah,
you can be like, okay, so what part of me is great?
yeah, it doesn't
But
mean,
what
it
you were,
really doesn't mean anything.
yeah, but if I say you're warm and you're friendly and you're engaging and you're intelligent and you're insightful, well, gosh, all of a sudden you're going, oh, I know what's right with me, right? You're hearing the specificity of that. And so that idea of appreciation, very specific appreciation, and gratitude is like the magic bullet, you know. And with that, we can bring in that component of curiosity, genuine curiosity, not the judgmental attitudes that we can fall into. We all do. We all can get judgmental. Anyone who thinks they've achieved beyond that, get curious about your own thought patterns and ask yourself, where do I show up in judgment? Because we all can struggle with that from time to time. But part of creating a connection is to get genuinely curious about your partner, right? To genuinely not, well, why do you do that? But so help me understand, why would you make that choice?
Hmm,
Just really
interesting.
being curious to understand the thought pattern and what's going on behind the
'Cause that's
thoughts.
a complex being that you're with. It's
Mhm.
another complex being
Yeah.
who's full of history and paradigms and pains and traumas and hopes and dreams. It's pretty
Yeah.
amazing when you think about it. It takes us so long. Maybe we never really know ourselves even. And then we're partnered with another person. Ah! So much
Yeah.
unlimited possibility for learning just within that scenario.
Mhm. Absolutely. And opportunities to grow too.
Yeah,
As
because
you're,
don't you think do you find that each time a couple learn something about each other like that, they just get a deeper relationship. It just gets bigger and better. Somebody that I really respect said recently, 14 years into their marriage, they realized they found 14 years into their marriage, they found the perfect partner, and it was their partner. But it took them that long to really get to know how fabulous
yeah.
their partner was.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a really good point that you bring up, because sometimes it doesn't start out fabulous. Sometimes it's that attachment wounds, it's the fears, the anxieties, maybe previous trauma that even bring us together. Maybe it's the reason why we partnered with this person, because hey, I was neglected and abused at home, and this person gives me a little bit of attention. So the level of neglect and abuse I'm receiving from them doesn't feel like neglect and abuse at all, because it's nothing compared to what I grew up around, right?
Yeah.
And so we get into a relationship, and then we get the question: do we get to create an earned, secure attachment? What's the choice there? What do you want to do with that? Because I've seen it over and over again where couples have been married 7, 15, 25, 47 years. And even at that 47-year mark, may have been like, I don't even know why we're together. We don't enjoy each other. But when we start to unpeel some of these outside things and start getting to the core, and the responsibility comes in and the compassion goes out and the curiosity is genuine, all of a sudden they realize, boy, they really have my back. We're really a team. We're together in this, and the marriage flourishes. And so it doesn't matter where you are in the process of that, you always have choice.
Mhm.
Right. And what I often tell my clients is, when they say, oh, I just really have to do blah, 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 I flip it. You get to. It's such a powerful phrase. I get to. And the question I get to, or the statement I get to create earned secure attachment in my marriage. You still have the option to choose. Do I want to create earned secure attachment in my marriage? But once you've said yes, now you get to do it and fill it out. Right. So it creates a dynamic that's really powerful for healing.
So as we wrap up, I know as we wrap up that we have several other interviews in the queue, because this was just kind of an overview
Mhm.
of the types of things that prohibit a healthy relationship, and it was really fantastic, really thorough, and really interesting. What would you like to, is there something you'd like to say as a wrap up to people who just don't settle for less than their best? They're constantly improving. They want to have a beautiful, extraordinary life across the board.
Right.
Are there a couple ending statements that you'd like to make to that group of people of high achieving lifestyle?
Absolutely. One of the things I'd like to say that I think is can be missed sometimes is, sometimes when we're a high achiever and we really have big goals in our lives, the area that suffers is our relationships, because it takes taking your thoughts captive, putting things aside, and moving forward to get a project done. But that's not what it takes for a healthy relationship. Right? Relationships take connection. And so some of the most powerful people that I've worked with in the past are some of the ones that need the most support in their relationships, because they haven't practiced that. Sometimes we're driven for being excellent and achieving and creating results because that's how we got security growing up as a child, but that doesn't work in a marital dynamic.
Yeah.
That doesn't work in building intimacy. And so as I shared with you before, I'm sharing with your audience this opportunity to watch a workshop that I did on emotional connection, building a connection that lasts. And in that, there's some questions in there. There's a handout with some curious questions that you can ask your partner. They're questions to fall in love by. So these questions have actually been researched to create, they've been proven to create intimacy in a relationship. So they're wonderful questions. But if you find yourself watching this workshop and things are really new for you and really like, I've never looked at it this way before. I encourage you to get some support and really delving deep and being excellent in your relationships, because that ultimately research has also shown us that people who are highly emotionally intelligent are more high achievers and have more income, make more money. So there you go.
So this really incredible interview that we just had is a gateway that you've offered this next interview that people can watch in your link and explore some of the curricular materials. So generous that allowed us to kind of double dip with you in this workshop. Thank you so much. I just feel like it feels so sweet to have everything in life, and we can have it all. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us about this really essential topic in a fabulous and extraordinary life. Thank you, Anne.
No, thank you. Thank you for putting this together. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.